Just now, at 9:30 p.m., the clock struck 9. We were both bundled up against the chilly night air as Eric and I made our way through the foggy streets because the mist absorbed all sounds and muted the neon lights that glimmered above the shuttered stores. The city was uncommonly silent. My anticipation was growing, so I buried my hands more in my pockets. Eric suggested we head out here in search of the notorious nighttime diner. Even though I didn't think it was a good idea, I couldn't help but be curious. "Just what is going on here?" I inquired, my voice barely audible. But I was unable to articulate my reason. Perhaps it was the eerie stillness or the mist that enveloped us. Eric grinned at me, his breath catching in the chilly air. "The restaurant supposedly opens at precisely 10 p.m. closes just before sunrise. It has been around longer than the city itself, according to some." He waited for emphasis, not to mention the regulations. "Here are the regulations." Everyone was talking about that. Internet discussion groups, hushed conversations on college campuses, and even party chit-chat. When the clock strikes 10, legend has it that the diner had rules, and they were all crazier than the last. Still, nobody knew who enforced them, or why they existed, despite much discussion. Others argued that it was just an eccentric custom meant to entice customers. The influence that the eatery supposedly had over its customers was suggested by others as being more sinister. As I attempted to appear casual, I inquired if you believe it's simply a gimmick. "Certainly," Eric retorted, "but doesn't that add to the excitement? I mean, where is your spirit of exploration?" I lied and smiled, trying to persuade myself. Rather than him, the regulations themselves didn't make sense to me. But what on earth could a diner possibly be like? The structure became visible as we rounded a bend. Nestled between two weathered brick buildings, it was at the end of a dimly lit arcade. Eric pointed at it, facing the faint light ahead. The diner had a weathered and damaged exterior, and the heated air inside caused the glass to fog up. A neon sign over the entrance flickered and emitted a sickly yellow light onto the damp pavement, serving as the sole indicator of existence. I could just make out figures through the grime-streaked glass as we drew near. I felt a knot form in my gut. "Are you prepared?" Taking hold of the door handle, Eric inquired. For an instant, I was unsure. Glance across the roadway that lies behind us. Everything in its path seemed to be swallowed up by the thickening fog. The atmosphere seemed to be encircling us. Nodding, I inhaled deeply. "I think we can pull this off." With Eric's help, we were able to open the door, and inside, the aroma of stale coffee, aged leather, and a subtle touch of metallic washed over me as a wave of warm, musty air swept over me. The room had low lighting, painting dark silhouettes across the checkerboard surface. I looked around the room, attempting to find my position. Red leather cushions from the rows of booths were cracked and worn from years of use. On the other side of the extended counter were neatly lined up stools with ripped cloth tops. Among the scattered customers were an elderly couple who were speaking into their cups, a solitary woman who was facing away from us, and a man who was sitting alone and staring at the window, slowly and methodically spooning sugar into her glass. The absolute quietness of the scene was the thing that first grabbed my attention. The other customers hardly budged, their movements as slow as if caught in a surreal, dreamlike state. I cast an eye over at Eric, who seemed to have picked it up as well. As we made our way to a vacant booth in the room's center, his customary bluster appeared to diminish a bit. We sat down, and the seats squeaked with our weight. "Okay. This place is officially creepy," Eric murmured, his dramatic side shining through. "Yeah, I'm not joking," I said, my gaze darting across the room once more. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was something about the diner that made me feel queasy. It felt like the entire location was observing our every move. A waitress quietly arrived and cut us off in the middle of our talk. Out of nowhere, she slid two menus onto the table and remained silent the entire time. She moved with an almost mechanical fluidity and departed just as swiftly as she had arrived. Something was plainly off with Eric. He arched an eyebrow at me. "Wow, that was quite an experience," he whispered. "It appears that tonight we will not be receiving the usual warm and cheerful service." Curiosity piqued, I reached for the menu. The plastic cover was old, sticky, and had an aged feel to it. Then my eyes landed on the front, warehouse. Rules was boldly displayed in black font. Stranger and stranger numerical instructions appeared beneath the title. First rule. Except for the very first customer, it is rude to sit facing the entryway. Second rule. It is impolite to welcome staff members as they come. Communicate only when called upon. Third principle. Offer an uninvited visitor a drink and then go to the bathroom. If they persist in joining your table, do not return till the diner clock rings. Rules number 4. Shut your eyes and hold them closed until the humming stops. Fifth rule. Do not glance at the server until they leave your table if they drop anything. Sixth rule. Don't turn around and act like you didn't hear your name murmured behind you. The seventh rule is that you should not pick up a dropped utensil. Avoid stooping down to retrieve it, unless you want to find out what's hiding under the table. Eighth rule. Stay put if you hear what sound like footsteps trailing behind you. Gently ease up till the noise subsides. I went over the rules twice, and each time they were more unnerving than the last. The more I thought about how precise they were, the more my saliva dried up. These weren't the regulations of a charming cafe. These served as cautions. I quickly returned my gaze to Rule 1. Never sit facing the entrance unless you are the first customer to arrive. A chill ran down my spine as I glanced over my shoulder at the glass door. Look at this, Eric whispered, pointing at Rule 4. If you hear soft humming while eating, close your eyes. What is this place, a haunted house? I forced a laugh, but my heart wasn't in it. It's probably just some elaborate gimmick, I said, trying to convince myself, to get people talking. Yeah, right, Eric replied, his voice tinged with skepticism. Well, we came here for the experience. Let's just roll with it. He looked at me, waiting for some kind of agreement. I nodded, feeling a tight knot of anxiety form in my chest. We flipped open the menus and pretended to browse the food options, though neither of us really had an appetite. My eyes kept drifting back to the rules, especially Rule 1. Wait, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We weren't the first ones here, and I trailed off, glancing at the door. Through the grimy glass, something moved. I couldn't make it out clearly, just a dark silhouette shifting in and out of the foggy night. It was tall, unnaturally so, and seemed to sway as it stood there. I blinked, trying to focus, but it faded into the darkness. What? Eric asked, leaning forward. What did you see? There's something out there, I muttered, not taking my eyes off the door. Whatever it was, it appeared to be something. Don't mess with me, he said with a strain in his voice. The atmosphere here is unsettling enough as it is. I abruptly turned around to confront him again and said, I'm not joking around with you. Something jumped out at me. An increasing sense of discomfort between us caused us to both fall into silence. The regulations were serious now. I knew for sure we were already breaking one of the rules that this area had established. As time went on, the hostility between us intensified. I continued looking through the glass at the entryway, trying to see if anyone was coming or going. A chill ran down my spine as I relived the fleeting sight of the mysterious stranger outside. As he tapped his fingers on the table, Eric shuffled anxiously across from me. There was complete stillness while we waited. With her lifeless eyes peering directly into ours, the waitress silently glided up to our table and then disappeared again. Seeing her made my flesh crawl. I clenched my jaw and looked down at the menu, trying not to speak or even notice that she was there, all while keeping in mind the second guideline. Eric's expression changed to one of forced silence as his eyes expanded. The waitress's voice seemed distant and monotone after a lengthy, unnerving silence. What is it that you're craving? She didn't ask it like a question, more like a command. The words felt cold and wrong, echoing strangely in the air around us. It was as if the sound didn't belong in this place. Eric coughed and glanced at me, seeking some form of validation. I nodded subtly, indicating he should answer first. He took a deep breath and said, I'll have a black coffee and pancakes. His voice trembled slightly, but he managed to get the words out. The waitress turned her gaze to me, her eyes boring into mine like a predator assessing its prey. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet her eyes for only a moment before I replied, Same for me. Please, she didn't react, didn't even blink. She just scribbled something onto her notepad and turned to leave. As she walked away, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, as though a great weight had lifted off my chest. I exhaled slowly, my heartbeat gradually returning to a more regular rhythm. That was weird. Eric muttered, breaking the silence between us. Did you see how she looked at us? I nodded, rubbing my hands together to warm them. Yeah, like she was judging us for even being here, I replied, keeping my voice low, and the way she spoke was like she didn't care what we ordered, almost like it didn't matter. We sat in silence for a few minutes, staring at each other, too afraid to voice the questions racing through our minds. We both knew something wasn't right. This place felt wrong, like it was bending reality in subtle ways, making us question our perceptions. After what felt like an eternity, the waitress returned with our orders. She placed the coffee cups and plates in front of us with meticulous precision, her movements almost robotic. Enjoy your meal, she intoned before turning on her heel and drifting back to the shadows. Did you hear that? Eric whispered, leaning closer to me. She said, enjoy your meal. It's like she was forcing herself to say it. I nodded, my eyes locked on the steaming cup of coffee in front of me. I had an overwhelming urge to down the coffee and leave, to get as far away from this diner as possible. But something inside me, perhaps morbid curiosity, kept me rooted. In my seat, I picked up my fork and prodded at the pancakes, watching the syrup ooze slowly down the sides. Then it started. A soft, melodic humming filled the air around us. My heart skipped a beat as I remembered Rule 4. If you hear soft humming while eating, immediately close your eyes and wait for the humming to stop. Eric, I hissed, grabbing his wrist. His eyes widened in alarm as he began to hear the sound. Close your eyes, now. What? He stammered, his fork frozen in midair. Just do it, I snapped, shutting my own eyes tightly. I heard Eric mutter a curse. Before he followed suit, the humming grew louder, swelling into a haunting lullaby that reverberated through my skull. It was everywhere, in the air, in my ears, inside my own head. My grip on the fork tightened until my knuckles turned white. I kept my eyes squeezed shut, trying to focus on anything but the unnerving sound. I felt a cold presence sweep through the room like a gust of wind in an enclosed space. My skin prickled, and the air grew thick and suffocating. Every instinct screamed at me to open my eyes, to look at what was happening around us. But I knew that would break the rule. I had to stay still. I had to endure. The humming seemed to circle our table, changing in pitch and rhythm as if it was studying us, trying to coax us into making a mistake. My breathing grew ragged, my chest tightening with fear. I wanted to reach out to Eric to feel some form of connection, but I was too afraid to move. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the humming ceased. I held my breath, waiting, listening. I heard Eric's shaky breathing beside me, but no other sound disturbed the air. It's over, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I think we can open our eyes now. I hesitated, then slowly cracked my eyes open. Though physically unchanged, the diner had a chillier, darker vibe than before. Eric appeared as white as a ghost when I gazed in his direction, in a state of panic. He frantically scanned the room with his wide eyes. Were you aware of that? With a quiver in his voice, he inquired. It felt as though something was present at this very moment. I responded with a yes. My mouth parched. I looked over at the other customers, anticipating their judgmental stares because of our concern. As if nothing had transpired, they all remained seated and continued to consume their meals. Looking down at my plate, I realized that I had lost all desire to eat. Something was off with the pancakes. They appeared grayer, as if the color had been drained. With my stomach in knots, I pushed the plate aside. Eric mumbled something about how we need to leave. He cautiously glances over to the door. The regulations no longer concern me. This is my desire to depart. As soon as the waitress reappeared, she stood calmly at the edge of our table, and I was about to agree. My pulse had almost halted. I jogged my memory of Rule 2, remain silent until summoned, with my jaw tightly closed and my pulse racing. I patiently awaited what would happen. Do you have any other preferences? Her voice was emotionless as she inquired. Shaking my head, I averted my eyes from hers. She paused for an awkward second, her very presence making me shudder, before gracefully resuming her position at the counter. A stern whisper from Eric indicated that was it. Our departure is imminent. A knot started to develop in my throat as I nodded. We got about to rise up when I stole another look at the menu, this time seeing the rules section. I felt Rule 8 was a warning hanging over my head. Stay put if you hear what sound like footsteps trailing behind you. Gently ease up till the noise subsides. That wasn't all. What was worse was still to come. Standing suddenly, Eric's chair clattered noisily on the floor, shattering the stifling stillness that pervaded the eatery. It seemed like we still had a long way to go at this location, and a feeling of foreboding crept over me. Eric retrieved some cash from his wallet and tossed it onto the table. "Come on, let's go." While looking wide-eyed and nervously toward the door, he whispered something under his breath. Like me, he wanted out. The atmosphere seemed to deepen as we began to make our way toward the entrance. It was as if I were trudging through muck. My legs were heavy. I was acutely aware of our impending escape, despite the background noise of the other customers' whispers and the delicate clinking of silverware. And then, as we approached the entrance, I perceived its sound, the clear sound of a chair scuffing behind us. I felt my heart sink. Our table had a new member. I looked over at Eric, whose normally pale face had turned ghostly white. In a low, unsettling voice, he murmured no into the spooky diner. Rules. Turning back to look, I did it slowly. A towering, lean individual was occupying my seat. The guy was dressed in a classic suit, the kind you'd see in images taken a few decades ago. As if to hide his features, his hair hung over his face like a black veil as he leaned forward. I felt a chill run down my spine as I noticed how out of place he seemed in his surroundings. "We have to follow the rule," I muttered at Eric, attempting to maintain some control over my voice. "Please return to the table, right now." We got close to the stranger with hesitation. He did not move at all. He seemed to be peering down at something unseen on the table, his head cocked forward. As if by magic, the air pressure in the chamber increased, and the darkness and chilliness descended upon me. I could feel my heart racing in my throat and my hands slippery with perspiration. In spite of my shaking fingers, I retrieved my mug of coffee and set it down in front of the total stranger. In this place, I was able to utter the words "take a sip" in a hushed tone. He reached for the cup with long, deliberate motions of his hand. He possessed fingers that were unusually long and skinny, with skin that appeared nearly see-through. Raising the cup to his mouth, he took a long, leisurely drink. I forced myself to look aside despite the shiver that ran up my spine. "Restroom," I moaned as I nudged Eric forward. "This is a mandatory departure." Eric stared intently at the unknown person as he nodded, careful not to look at each other until we were at the door. To the restroom, we stepped away from the table. We both let out a sigh as soon as we stepped inside. Seemed as though we were emerging from the murky depths for the first time. That was what on earth? With a tight grip on the sink's edge, Eric rasped, "Which man was that?" The answer came out as "I don't know," as my voice quivered. To be sure, we were bound by the rule. It is time to wait for the bell to ring. As we stood there, our frantic breaths resonating in the cramped room, the seconds seemed like minutes. Anxieties about what had just transpired caused my thoughts to rush. We felt as though the restaurant were alive and following our every move because of how stuffy the air was. Afterwards, the outside cafe clock started to strike the hour, counting chimes from 1 to 3. With a lump of anxiety in our throats, we exchanged glances. We needed to go back. We mustered up the courage to approach the table as we emerged from the restroom, just a void. We no longer saw the stranger, leaving behind only our 2 glasses and the plates of pancakes that were not consumed. My trembling breath was an attempt at relief, but it didn't last. We heard a mechanical clatter as we redirected our attention to the entryway. I froze. The sound of clinking could be heard as my fork plummeted to the floor, shook a few times, and finally settled just beneath the table. The pit of my stomach tightened as my heart raced. Rule number 7. If your utensil falls, do not pick it up. Avoid stooping down to retrieve it. Doing so can reveal an unwelcome object hiding beneath the table. I hushed a request to Eric, who was fixated on the fork, telling him to leave it alone. Avoid peeking under any covers. Fear gaping in his eyes, he nodded nonetheless. His tense physique was radiating tension, and I could feel it. Both of us knew what Rule 7 had warned us about, but the temptation to look was so strong that it was like an itch I couldn't seem to get rid of. Then we detected a muted, hushed noise emanating from under the table. It shivered through me. Crying gently in the darkness underneath us were the faint, heart-wrenching sobs of a child. Grasping the edge of the table prevented me from losing my composure as my stomach contorted wildly. I clenched my teeth and whispered, "Don't listen," while staring out into space. "It's all attention." A more urgent and piercing wail was emitted, resonating within the confines of the eatery. It was an urgent, unsettling sound that pounded on your chest, urging you to pay attention. My eyes welled up with tears of dread rather than grief. I closed my eyes tightly, attempting to block out the background sounds. The cries, however, continued, rising in progressively more intense waves of misery and despair. He murmured, "It's just a trick," as Eric moved awkwardly next to me, spent more time staring at himself than at me. "It is not possible for us." The screams transformed into jumbled, scarcely legible, but undeniably desperate phrases. "Assist me, please." A strong impulse to investigate prompted me to stoop and uncover the mystery lurking beneath the surface as the voice pried at the corners of my heart. My fingers nibbled into my palms as I tightened my fist, and I said it again, my voice quivering. "It's not real. Its only intention is to draw attention to us." Amidst the ongoing sobbing, there was a sound that sounded like little feet dragging on the floor. Every nerve in my body was aching to look under the table and see what was hiding there. In the midst of all the chaos, I felt as though I was losing touch with reality, the boundary between fact and fiction becoming increasingly porous. My chair's leg was thereafter grasped by a small hand. I tensed up. Crippling terror caused my muscles to seize up, as if pleading for my assistance. It clutched firmly. My breath came out in short, terrified gasps as my pulse raced so rapidly that I feared it may explode. Despite my overwhelming want to go, I hissed at Eric, telling him not to look. "It isn't genuine." My chair's hold on me became more rigid, and my sobbing morphed into a terrible scream. The strain of not glancing down caused my eyes to burn, of ignoring the horror show that is happening right under our feet. I sensed that my sanity was on the brink of collapse, just as suddenly as it began. It came to a halt, the clutch was let go, the sobbing subsided, and the oppressive stillness of the environment returned. Eric, who was pale and trembling, had wide, haunted eyes, and I mustered up the courage to look at him. I did it. "Look who it is." His voice was raspy. His voice was so low it was scarcely audible. With a heavy heart, I nodded. "We didn't peek under the table, though we did what was said." With trembling hands still clutching the table's edge, he let out a shaky breath. "Let's leave this place," he whispered with an effort on his voice. "This is too much for me." I nodded in agreement as a wave of queasy sensation swept over me. We rose slowly, being cautious not to peer under the table as we retreated. Nobody seemed to mind that we were staring at the waitress's sunken eyes as she stood behind the counter, and the other customers carried on with their meals as if nothing had transpired. Carefully making our way toward the exit, we set off. I could make out the faint sound of distant footfall as we neared the door. The thought of Rule 8 made me stiffen up. Stay put if you hear what sound like footsteps trailing behind you. Gently ease up till the noise subsides. With a strain in my voice, I cautioned Eric not to turn around, go at a leisurely pace. As the sound of approaching feet resounded, we pressed on, our hearts racing with dread. Despite my natural inclination, I resisted the need to turn around and observe our pursuers. We would be in violation of the rule if we did, though. Everything we had experienced up to this point paled in comparison to what was beyond that breached rule. A short distance separated us from the door. The icy handle was seized by my outstretched hand, to which I pried open. As we stepped out into the misty darkness, the footsteps came to a halt. We were both gasping for air, our expressions pallid and contorted, and I looked over at Eric. I whispered, my voice barely audible, "Let's go." And then I disappeared. The stifling atmosphere of the eatery began to dissipate as we sped down the street, because we were both terrified of saying the wrong thing and the lingering effects of that thought. We stayed silent. Just as we turned the last bend, I stole one more look behind us. With its pale neon sign fluttering in the fog, the diner stood motionless. For an instant, I felt as though I caught sight of a shadow peering out the window, observing our every move. I averted my gaze and accelerated my step. I was convinced of one thing. Regardless of what had transpired inside, we had no intention of returning.